kneels before God.
Remember when a third movie in a franchise actually delivered and reminded everyone why they loved it in the first place? As it should. Released in 1989, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade brought everything back. The adventure, the humor, the sense that at any moment something was about to go very wrong for everyone involved. Naturally. Directed by Steven Spielberg and produced by George Lucas, the film stars Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, archaeologist, professor, chronic poor decision maker, alongside Sean Connery as his father, Henry Jones Sr., with Denholm Elliott, Alison Doody, and John Rhys Davies rounding out the cast. What ended up on screen felt like the franchise hitting its stride all over again. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade you probably never knew. Stick around for number 1, because the most powerful artifact in the entire film, the object every Nazi in Europe was willing to die for, was deliberately designed to look like something you'd find in a garage sale for 50 cents. Yup, honestly iconic. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell. That helps YouTube show this to more people who still consider the fedora a legitimate fashion choice. Bold choice. Alright, let's find that holy grail. Number 15. Indy's dad was barely old enough to be his dad. Sean Connery played Henry Jones Sr. with the full weight of a man who had been quietly disappointed in people for decades. A very specific energy. On screen, the generational gap between father and son felt completely believable.
Yes, sir. It is you, Junior. Don't call me that, please. Well, what are you doing here? I came to get you. What do you think?
Of course, Connery was 58 and Harrison Ford was 46, 12 years apart. That is not a father and son. That is two guys, a beard, and a very convincing dynamic. To sell the illusion, Connery made some deliberate choices. He ditched the on-screen hairpiece he'd been wearing through his film roles for years, leaned hard into the gray, and committed fully to looking like a man who had spent 4 decades surrounded by ancient manuscripts and zero patience for nonsense. And it worked. No notes. Ford, still clean-shaven and punching his way through every problem, looked like the younger generation by default, which, relatively speaking, he barely was. The script did the rest of the heavy lifting, the constant junior, the academic arrogance, the bickering that felt less like dialogue and more like 40 years of unresolved frustration finally getting some fresh air. Connery played the disapproval so naturally that audiences never once stopped to do the math.
Junior, give me your other hand. I can't hold on.
I can get it. I can almost reach it, Dad.
Indiana.
And thank goodness. 12 years, a beard, and a pair of round glasses completely erased any reason to question it. That's either a masterclass in casting or proof that a good enough attitude can override almost anything. Probably both. Number 14. They built the Grail Temple for real, then started breaking it. The Grail Temple collapse that closes out The Last Crusade carries a weight that pure effects work rarely delivers. The production built the whole thing and then engineered it to fall apart on command, because of course they did. The interior was a full-scale constructed set, built with the kind of detail usually reserved for something intended to last. The crew rigged it with hydraulic systems designed to physically shift the floor, crack sections apart, and simulate a structure in the process of collapsing, all while cameras rolled and actors performed inside it. Yeah, totally normal filmmaking. The hydraulics could be reset between takes, the crew spending roughly 20 minutes returning everything to its starting position and filling the cracks with fresh plaster before the next run. The set had taken 6 weeks to build, supported on 80 feet of hydraulics and 10 gimbals, all of it constructed specifically to be shaken apart on cue. The set was specifically engineered to be broken and rebuilt repeatedly until every shot landed correctly. The shot of the Grail hitting the floor, triggering the first crack, proved too difficult for the full-scale set and was handed off to miniature work. For the larger moments like the chasm splitting open beneath the characters, the production brought in additional miniature work to handle what the full-scale set couldn't. Because of this, the finale feels physically unstable from the first crack to the last frame. The environment reads as genuinely unreliable, because the production deliberately built one that was, in a controlled way, actually unreliable. Genius. Number 13. 5 words that broke the entire set. There's a moment in Castle Brunwald where Indy and his father are tied up together. And Indy just figured out that Elsa is working for the Nazis? He turns to his father and asks the obvious question, "How did you know?" The scene was written to stay tense.
How did you know she was a Nazi?
Sean Connery had other ideas. Without any warning, Connery looked at Harrison Ford and delivered 5 words that nobody on set saw coming. "She talks in her sleep."
She talks in her sleep.
The implication landed like a grenade. Harrison Ford's stunned double take was completely genuine, because nobody had told him Connery was about to casually reveal that Henry Jones Sr. had also been friendly with Elsa. The crew lost it. The cast lost it. Filming stopped entirely because there was simply no powering through it. The set had to wait out the laughter before anyone could attempt a straight face again. What makes it land even harder is the layering. It's funny on its own. It's funnier when you see Ford's genuine reaction to it. And it's funniest when you realize the joke is specifically about Indiana Jones, world-traveling archaeologist, seasoned adventurer, puncher of Nazis, getting romantically one-upped by his tweed-wearing academic father. Number 12. The classy Zeppelin scene was filmed with no pants. The Zeppelin sequence in The Last Crusade is one of the more refined moments in the film. Harrison Ford and Sean Connery sitting across from each other like proper gentlemen. Composed, dignified, completely pantsless. The set was brutally hot, studio lights cranked to full power, heavy period costumes, and a scene meant to feel like an elegant cruise altitude while everyone involved was slowly being cooked alive. Sean Connery assessed the situation, made a swift executive decision, and removed his trousers.
And I played it without my trousers. And Harrison said, "You're not going to play the scene without your trousers." I said, "Well, if I don't, I'll be stopping all the time because I sweat."
Harrison Ford walked in, took one look at what Connery had going on below the table, and needed a moment. Connery apparently made his case with complete sincerity. The camera never drops below the tabletop. The audience sees nothing, and everyone gets to finish the scene without heat exhaustion. Ford considered this for approximately 5 seconds and reached the only logical conclusion available. Trousers gone. Fair enough.
You know, sharing your adventures is an interesting experience.
It's not always shared.
2 of the biggest movie stars on the planet sat there in their shirt tails and delivered one of the most quotable exchanges in the entire franchise. And nobody watching in the theater had any idea. The scene looks polished, unhurried, and thoroughly civilized. Because that is what good acting does. And also because the camera operator had very clear instructions about where not to point. Number 11. They built a 28-ton tank from scratch. The desert tank chase in The Last Crusade makes modern CGI look like it's been getting away with something. It looks real because it essentially was. The production built the tank from scratch. The base was a functioning excavator, which the crew transformed into a 36-foot, 28-ton steel machine that could actually move across the rough desert terrain without disintegrating. Someone looked at heavy construction equipment and decided the logical next step was making it look like it belonged in World War II, and then driving actors around on top of it. Getting it to set was its own ordeal. The tank had to be transported whole, flown out to Almeria on a cargo plane, and then hauled in on a low-loader truck. Once operational, it broke down twice during filming, most notably when 2 cooling valves exploded due to solder melting and mixing with the oil, which for a custom-built 28-ton metal beast being pushed through heat and rough terrain with a few crew attached to it borders on remarkable. The production also built multiple versions, a full-scale tank for the action sequences and a lighter aluminum top section for close-up work, so the actors weren't performing next to a structural liability, and a miniature for the cliff sequence at the end. 3 separate builds for one vehicle because the commitment to getting it right had no upper limit. The finished sequence still holds up decades later precisely because the threat was genuine. When Indy is hanging off that thing, there is no visual trick softening the stakes. The tank was real, the desert was real, and the stunt work was exactly as dangerous as it looks. No pressure. Number 10. An invisible bridge fooled everyone. The leap of faith is one of the great cinematic illusions in the entire franchise. Indiana Jones standing at the edge of a bottomless canyon, nothing beneath him but air and bad odds. Stepping off anyway. It looks like magic. It was actually styrofoam. ILM built a miniature set, 9 feet tall, 13 feet wide, rock face carved from styrofoam, and then had an artist, Paul Huston, paint the bridge by hand while looking directly through the lockdown camera. He painted exactly what he saw beneath it, matching every shadow, every texture, every crack in the canyon wall behind it. From that one specific camera position, the bridge disappeared completely into the background. Move the camera 2 inches in any direction, and the whole illusion collapsed into an embarrassingly visible prop that had no business being in a major motion picture. The entire trick lived and died on a single locked camera angle. One sweet spot. The margin for error was essentially zero. The effects team had exactly one shot at making it work, and absolutely nobody on that set was breathing normally while they waited to find out if it did. When the film finally shifts the angle to reveal the bridge to the audience, it's a deliberate move, the illusion being dismantled only after it has already done its job. The movie waited until it no longer needed to fool you before showing you exactly how it pulled it off, which is just rude in the best way. Number 9. The burning castle sounded like it came from a foam cup. The castle sequence in The Last Crusade has a lot going on. Fire climbing the walls, the Jones boys tied up back to back, a revolving fireplace that somehow becomes their best escape option.
Situation has not improved.
Its controlled chaos and pulling it off required 2 very different kinds of problem solving. The revolving fireplace was a real mechanical set piece, a fully functional rotating structure built at Elstree Studios that Ford and Connery were actually strapped into and spun around on camera. The BFI production photos confirm exactly that, 2 of the biggest stars in Hollywood physically bound together in a rotating prop, filming in a room actively being set on fire around them. The fire sequence was deliberately saved for last in the castle shoot, which is the kind of scheduling decision that tells you everything about how much the crew trusted it to behave. The fire itself looked convincing. What it sounded like on screen is a different story entirely. Sound designer Ben Burtt, the man responsible for some of the most recognizable audio in film history, needed the right sound for a castle burning.
I gotta tell you something.
Don't get sentimental now, Dad. Save it till we get out of here.
The floor's on fire. See? And the chair.
His solution was to digitally manipulate the noise made by a styrofoam cup. That's it. The crackling, roaring fire that fills the scene and sells every moment of urgency came from someone working over the sound of a foam coffee cup. Practical filmmaking in 1988 was essentially a competition between what you could physically build and what you could creatively fake. The castle fire won on both counts. The revolving fireplace was completely real, and the sound of it burning was entirely invented. Amazing. Number 8. Harrison Ford basically hired himself. Playing a younger version of an established character is a trap most actors don't escape cleanly. River Phoenix didn't have that problem, and a significant part of the reason is that Harrison Ford personally put him in the room. The two had already worked together on The Mosquito Coast, where they played father and son. Ford's recommendation to Spielberg wasn't about Phoenix's performance, it was more specific than that. Ford told him directly, "The guy who looks most like me when I was that age is this actor named River Phoenix."
And I think Harrison actually was the one that suggested River. He said to me, "The guy that looks most like me when I was that age is this actor named River Phoenix." And I believe that's a Harrison Ford idea.
Spielberg met Phoenix, agreed, and cast him. What Phoenix did next is what makes it worth talking about. Rather than leaning into impression territory mimicking Ford's voice, copying his expressions, Phoenix had quietly studied Ford between takes on The Mosquito Coast. The posture, the attitude, the specific energy of a man improvising his way through a crisis while somehow radiating confidence. Then Spielberg asked Ford to spend a week on set directing Phoenix personally. "I wanted to make sure he got the moves right," Ford said. The finished product is one of the most convincing same-character transitions the franchise ever pulled off. You watch the opening sequence and don't spend a single second adjusting. It just works. Quick pause. If you're all ready to join our expedition, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got plenty more behind-the-scenes chaos coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss the next adventure. While you're here, ring that bell and drop in the comments your favorite Last Crusade scene. Back to the countdown. We've got to make it back to Hatay in time. Number 7. The rat problem nobody ordered. The catacomb sequence in The Last Crusade is not subtle. Indy drops into the tunnel and is immediately surrounded by an absolute wall-to-wall carpet of rats.
Oh, rats.
It looks like the kind of thing a special effects team carefully constructed with mirrors and maybe a dozen trained animals hitting their marks on cue. It was roughly 5,000 real rats. Production couldn't just round up wild ones. Street rats come loaded with diseases, zero interest in following directions, and a general attitude problem that doesn't play well on a film schedule. So the production went with the completely reasonable alternative and had them specially bred under controlled conditions. Lucasfilm ordered 1,000 to start. It then got worse because rats are very good at one specific thing, and by the time filming arrived, the population had quintupled. The crew had commissioned a rat problem and received 5 times the rat problem at no additional charge. Truly horrifying. The rats also made at least one casting decision before Spielberg did. Actress Amanda Redman was originally offered the role of Elsa Schneider and turned it down flat. Her reason? A genuine phobia of rats and no interest in having them crawl across her head for a film schedule. Alison Doody got the part. For the fire sequences, the production swapped in 1,000 mechanical rats. And the sounds weren't rats at all. The audio team used sped-up chicken sounds because actual rats are apparently too quiet to convey the appropriate level of dread. The finished scene is 5,000 live rats, 1,000 mechanical ones, and chickens doing real vocal work. Somehow it remains one of the most effective sequences in the entire franchise. Number 6. The bird stunt was wilder than it looks. There's a moment in The Last Crusade where Henry Jones Sr. waves his umbrella at a flock of seagulls. The birds scatter into the path of an oncoming Nazi plane, and the whole thing goes sideways for the Nazis in the best possible way. It's quick, clever, and looks almost effortless on screen. Getting there was a different story entirely. Real seagulls were out of the question. Seagulls simply cannot be trained, and even setting that aside, they proved it immediately by refusing to fly on the first take. The crew substituted dummy prop birds placed on the bench, with a small group of doves concealed underneath a sheet. When the moment came, the doves were released and handfuls of white feathers were thrown into the air simultaneously. From the right distance, and with careful editing, it sold the illusion well enough. For the actual collision with the plane, ILM handled the closer shots by dropping feather-coated crosses directly onto the camera. A simple cheap trick that reads on screen as birds hitting the cockpit glass. The audio layer completed the illusion. The sounds in the finished scene are real seagull calls, dubbed over footage of doves that were released on cue from under a sheet, hitting a plane represented by feather-coated props dropped at the lens.
That was a problem because seagulls aren't trainable. What we did in the end, having got a guy to try and, he said, you can't do anything with them. What we did was we put fake seagulls all over the beach.
Prop birds, a handful of trained doves, some loose feathers, and borrowed seagull audio, all assembled into a 4-second gag that most audiences watched once and moved on from without a second thought. Number 5. There was an uncredited genius behind the best lines. The Last Crusade doesn't feel like standard action movie dialogue. It's too layered for that. The insults are wrapped in academic arrogance, and every argument feels like it has about 30 years of unresolved history quietly powering it. That's not something that just falls out of a script draft. That's Tom Stoppard. If that name sounds like it belongs in an entirely different conversation, well, it does. Stoppard wrote Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, won the Academy Award for Shakespeare in Love, and is widely considered one of the greatest playwrights of the 20th century. He was brought in late to polish the Last Crusade script, which turned out to be a fairly generous use of the word polish.
I feel if I've done something with a line, then the actor doesn't have to, the character doesn't have to.
He rewrote significant chunks of the dialogue and did it all under the pseudonym Barry Watson, with no on-screen credit attached to his real name anywhere on the finished product. Spielberg later said it plainly. Tom is pretty much responsible for every line of dialogue. He was paid $120,000 for the work. After the film became the highest grossing release of 1989, he received a $1 million bonus. One of the most celebrated writers alive quietly walked into a blockbuster action franchise under a fake name, rewrote nearly every line audiences still quote today, and collected what amounts to a very satisfying last laugh on the way out. Nobody in the theater had any idea. Not bad for just a quote polish. Number 4. The Last Crusade was Spielberg's cinematic apology tour. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom went places, dark places. We're talking child slavery, human sacrifice, and a villain casually ripping a still-beating heart out of a man's chest like it was perfectly normal Tuesday behavior. The backlash hit hard enough to help create the PG-13 rating. Temple of Doom and Gremlins released 2 weeks apart in the same summer. Steven Spielberg knew it most of all. He called it too dark, too subterranean, and much too horrific. He walked away creatively exhausted and had zero enthusiasm for a third Indiana Jones movie. He'd promised Lucas a trilogy, so he was already committed. He just needed a reason to actually care again. The development was not smooth. Lucas's first pitch was a haunted mansion story. Spielberg killed it immediately. Too close to Poltergeist, and a pretty lousy idea. Several scripts and drafts later, a story about a father and a son emerged. That's what got Spielberg all the way back in. The Last Crusade was deliberately built as a course correction, a return to the lighter adventure-driven energy of Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Nazis came back, the globe-trotting came back, the sense that nobody was about to watch something deeply traumatizing came back with them. The Last Crusade was Spielberg's reset button, and it worked. He straightened his tie and said, "All right, let's pretend that didn't happen." Number 3. This movie turned a real place into a bucket list overnight. The treasury at Petra in Jordan has been standing in that canyon for roughly 2,000 years before Indiana Jones rode up to it. Archaeologists knew it. Serious travelers knew it. The average person watching movies in 1989 had absolutely no idea it existed. Then The Last Crusade hit theaters, and that changed almost immediately. The reveal is one of the great cinematic location shots of its era. The camera follows Indy through a narrow canyon corridor, and suddenly the facade opens up. This enormous, elaborately carved structure glowing in the desert sun like it's been waiting specifically to be discovered by someone on horseback. Spielberg framed it like the entrance to the most significant place on Earth, which in the context of the film it essentially was. Audiences walked out of theaters and straight into travel agents' offices. Before the film, only a few thousand visitors made the trip to Petra each year. That number has since grown to nearly 1 million annually. The site eventually earned a spot on the list of the new 7 Wonders of the World, a designation that owes at least partial credit to Harrison Ford arriving on horse looking purposeful. The production earned access through the Jordanian royal family, with King Hussein and Queen Noor hosting the cast and crew as personal guests.
And we were guests of the royal palace in Aqaba. We were guests of King Hussein and Queen Noor, and they treated us great. We actually stayed.
The Queen occasionally gave Spielberg rides to the shooting locations. The King loaned the production the 4 horses used for the temple sequences at Petra, a generous call that ended up functioning as the most effective tourism campaign the country never had to pay for. To this day, visitors arrive at Petra and refer to it as the Indiana Jones Temple. It's technically a tomb. Nobody particularly cares, and honestly, can you blame them? Number 2, the most profitable goodbye in Hollywood history until it wasn't. When The Last Crusade hit theaters in 1989, Spielberg and Lucas shook hands on it. This was the end. Indy rode off into the sunset. The trilogy was complete. Nobody needed to revisit it. And for 19 years, nobody did. Then, somewhere in the early 2000s, Hollywood looked around at its development slate, quietly panicked, and reached for the dusty Rolodex of beloved franchises that hadn't been touched in decades. Rocky came back in 2006. Sylvester Stallone laced up the gloves again after a 16-year gap and pulled off a genuinely decent film that nobody saw coming. Die Hard came back in 2007, 12 years after the last one, and made over $380 million worldwide. Star Wars had already kicked this whole trend into gear with the prequels back in 1999. The message was clear. Audiences would absolutely show up for the thing they already loved, as long as you didn't completely embarrass it. Indiana Jones watched all of this, set down his coffee, and said, "Hold my hat." Kingdom of the Crystal Skull arrived in 2008, 19 years after The Goodbye, and made nearly $790 million worldwide. Critics had opinions, audiences had opinions. There were alien skulls involved, and a refrigerator, and a conversation we will not be having today, probably for the best. Then came 2023, Dial of Destiny, Harrison Ford at 80. One More Ride, a production budget of nearly $300 million, which ballooned to over $400 million once all costs were factored in, and a worldwide gross of just over $384 million. The math on that is not what anyone was hoping for, and the studio knew it. The franchise that was definitively finished in 1989 came back twice. Made a combined $1 billion+ across 2 films and still managed to leave the second return looking like a complicated subject to bring up at a meeting. Some goodbyes stick, some don't, and some end up becoming very expensive lessons in the difference. Number 1. The Holy Grail was designed to disappoint you on purpose. The Holy Grail is the entire engine of The Last Crusade. Every chase, every Nazi with a clipboard exists because someone wants to get their hands on this artifact. The movie spends 2 hours building towards it. The audience is primed for something extraordinary. It's a clay cup, worn, plain, and completely unremarkable. Something that would get passed over at an estate sale without a second glance. That was entirely intentional. The production designer surrounded the real Grail with every other option imaginable. Gold-plated, jewel-encrusted, ornate enough to make a pirate feel underdressed. The villain walks in, scans the table, and gravitates immediately toward the most impressive-looking candidate in the room. It is the single most expensive mistake in the film, and he makes it with complete confidence. Indy, working from everything his father taught him, looks past all the spectacle and lands on the one cup that looks like it belongs to someone who didn't own anything else, a carpenter's cup. The design is a deliberate trap built on the assumption that people chasing power will always reach for whatever looks most like power. The genius of the choice is that it works on the audience too. Every instinct developed from watching adventure films says the important object should announce itself. The Last Crusade specifically engineers the Grail to disappoint those instincts, and then turns that disappointment into the entire point. The real prize was never going to look like treasure. That's what separates the people who find it from the ones who don't make it out of the room. Nicely played. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the film that was supposed to be the end and in a lot of ways still is. Indy rode into the sunset in 1989 and nothing that came after quite matched what was left behind in that canyon. Subscribe, drop your favorite fact below, and share this with someone who still gets unreasonably emotional when that John Williams theme kicks in. Hey, don't judge. Until next time, choose wisely. This is Remember When.